I'm going to talk today about India as an emerging SaaS hub. As you all gathered in this room realize, India has evolved as a destination beyond services, which was the traditional IT model at one point in time. And I'm going to walk you through some of the ingredients that are in place in India as an ecosystem for SaaS businesses that makes it that special. So without further ado, here we go. So if you look at this slide, what we are really saying is that compared to several other important geographies, India is second only to US when it comes to the talent pool, when it comes to SaaS-ready professionals, whether it is in terms of product managers, UI, UX designers, or SaaS-ready software developers. India has a very rich and deep pool of talent that can really create world-class products. Also, to nurture an ecosystem, to give it life and take it to its logical conclusion, you need people to nurture an ecosystem. India is lucky to have some very, very well-known, respected names, who have over the years found their, feet in the valley and elsewhere, and are now mentoring the new emerging SaaS businesses to help them reach their potential. Some of those gentlemen are also present here. I'm happy to have Dheeraj come in and talk with us here. India is very frequently known to have a cost advantage, right? And that is obviously visible, as you can look at this slide, where India can have up to 30% cost advantage, in some SaaS businesses, which can have a dramatic impact when it comes to the SaaS economics that one will have. But it's not just about the cost, frankly, and what really matters is what you're able to do with that. And this is where the story gets really interesting, because what is happening with this cost advantage is that Indian SaaS businesses are able to expand the addressable market. Whether it is the SMB segment, which has not had a very strong SaaS penetration till now, but is expected to increase significantly over the next few years, or it is the Asia enterprise segment, where, again, if you look at the SaaS penetration compared to average US businesses, it is much lower. And what you see here is there are benchmark Indian companies who have created products which are standing at par with their global peers and are able to expand the market significantly from there. This is, again, an extremely interesting slide, right? So what we normally associate India is with IT services and related businesses. It's interesting to see that there is a very significant interest that is being shown by some of the global majors, some of the very marquee names in looking at Indian businesses. If you look at Media.net, which was an acquisition that happened earlier this year, that was a $900 million acquisition. We believe we are reaching a tipping point where the first billion-dollar software acquisition is not very far. And when that happens, the day of Indian SaaS businesses would have truly arrived. Thank you very much. I would now like to invite Dheeraj and Anshu for a panel discussion.
Sure. So thanks for opening remarks. Thanks, Dheeraj, for being here.
Yeah.
Congrats on the first quarter yesterday.
Yeah.
Looks like a real public company now with earnings calls and everything. I was listening to it. It was great. So maybe we should just start there. And why don't you just give us a sense of, how does it feel to have a largely successful public Fortune 500 company, which is still a baby compared to like an Amazon or a Google, from a real starting from zero 5, 6 years ago with those conversations. So, and how India and Indian talent played a role.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty profound question. I mean, obviously we're not Fortune 500 yet, so someday we probably look forward to being one of those
If you keep
companies.
the rate of growth the same as the last 5 years, then I think in
Yeah,
about
yeah,
5 years
yeah.
you'll be the largest company.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, when we were growing up, I come from a middle class family, and scarcity was actually a good thing. In some sense, even when I look at it today, what you spend on and things like that, whether it's professionally or at home. I mean, like the things that I look at personally, I'm like, look, I'm never going to sell my stock because I don't need the money today, right? And that's great because investors don't know Nutanix as much, and they're looking at me as to what I'm doing with my 10b5-1 and things like that. So a lot of this is actually the roots of middle class where, you don't need a lot to survive. And I think the company started like that as well. We didn't need a lot to survive. While we did raise good amount of money, initially the wait was for the hockey stick. Like, we were always waiting for, is this a scalable business yet? So we didn't start top down in terms of hiring VPs and layers of VPs and VPs before we could really get the foundation right. Because I was part of a startup like 15 years ago where it was all built top down, like get the best people at the VP level and then they'll figure out what to do and what to build. And we had burned like $65 million.
Make it look like a real company before
Exactly,
you have a
exactly.
product.
Yeah. And we had barely made less than $1 million in terms of business. So I think those wounds were actually quite fresh, even though it was, kind of 10 years since that. So in 2010, we spent a lot of time thinking about why we were, why we had quit our jobs and how we want to go and really build this business and what the product would look like and so on. And till about April of 2013, we were still about 150 people. So 3.5 years ago, we were still 150 people. Now we are 2,600 people in a matter of 3.5 years. But we waited for that inflection point. And a lot of it was based on where is the repeat business? Are the customers, the same customers buying more and more? Or are we having to just sell and run to the next logo and to the next logo and so on? So that idea of how the current customers keep the lights on was a very important part of the overall story itself. So so all this was actually a part of that scarcity game that I talked about. Like at the end of the day, scarcity creates innovation. And even today, while we have a ton of money in the bank, my CFO and I talk about what does it mean not to be a penny pinching company, but at the end of the day, we spend a lot. Take Taylor that we've employed in 40 countries and everybody travels a lot to keep the company sort of kept, even though it looks like a global distributed team. Like we have 4 development hubs and so on. People travel a lot and we party a lot in conferences and things like that. But at the same time, we keep relatively modest headquarters. We keep a relatively modest set of buildings, things like that. They all contribute actually in some little way. Compared to us, there are companies that are equally big as us, but they're spending like $6 in Mountain View and we're spending like $3 in San Jose per square feet, triple net. So those things also matter because then you save a ton of money, probably millions of dollars a year that you could spend on daily lunches as opposed to spending on extremely expensive real estate and so on. So I think obviously there's a lot. The question that you asked is a never-ending answer to it. But
get my job done in 1 year.
But I think there's one more thing which is, I kept saying this from day one, and hopefully all of you entrepreneurs here will relate to this, that if you are in the valley, or whether it's Bangalore Valley or Silicon Valley, you know that the worst is not bad enough. This is the thing that and I'm sure you're going to think about this when you go and pursue your own dream of starting a company, which you have, having left Storm or about to leave. Is this public yet or not?
Yeah. So
almost public. I thought maybe StormBridge's guys are like, what? Anshu's leaving? But yeah, I think, the worst is not bad enough is an extremely reassuring thing in terms of emotional balance and stability. Because what's the worst that can happen? You quit your job, you're going to start something, and if it fails, then you can always walk into a job. And that sort of reassurance, not as much for you as much for your spouse probably, and your children, and all that thing.
Telling my wife's family yesterday. I saw some news item about how Google and I'm sure your company and others are hiring IITs and have like 200K pay packages. And I was like, I remember I had the best pay package on campus. It was 1 lakh rupees a year.
Yeah, which is
Right?
probably
The kid is
$1,500
a year, right? So when people say, when you talk about middle class, when we say middle class, we mean like really, really poor by American standards, like people, like no color TV kind of.
Yeah, absolutely,
That's not
absolutely.
like, we don't have a Benz.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the worst is not bad enough mentality actually helps, because I mean, right now we are headed in a direction that looks extremely fearful, because we want to go and kind of up the ante against what cloud computing should be like. There's like at least one big giant and stuff like that. And we're saying, how do we change the turf? Because we don't want to be yet in the AWS, but is there a hybrid play here? And the only way, like the way we went up against EMC, NetApp, VMware, was like we need to change the turf. We can't be doing exactly what VMware does, exactly what EMC does, exactly what NetApp does, but some combination of that people feel delighted about. And that's what the company is all about. How do you create delight by making a lot of these things converge together in one? And that fearlessness is also a little bit of the upbringing and coming here with nothing like, $900 in the pocket and 2 suitcases. So there's nothing to lose.
So when, sorry. Yeah, hopefully we can get this right. So I think one of the questions that a lot of people have here is, you kind of built a global company. Of course, you built it from San Jose and had the benefit of being here. But now that we're talking about companies that maybe have 80% of the resources in India to start with, or maybe 20%, what advice do you have for them, or what part of the, let me put it another way, the way I think about this question myself now that I'm beginning to work on some of these things. How do you take advantage of India and your Indian connections and a lot of smart people but also build a truly global company and a diverse company? The meaning of diversity now kind of funnily enough changes. So how did you think about some of those concepts? Because you obviously want to leverage your base, but at the same time you don't want to be another parochial company.
Yeah, so looking back, I don't know if there's a silver bullet, but looking back, what were the things that we did right? We knew that we're going to be extremely ambitious about R&D, and not all of it could come from San Jose because of the fact that we were still a nascent company whose stock was private. We were an unproven company, and it will continue to be unproven for the next 5-10 years, just like it was for Amazon, Salesforce, all these companies. There are always naysayers and fence-sitters that will be willing to pelt stones at you because you're not ready, you're not profitable, you're not this, you're not that, even though profitability means different things, actually. Cash flow positive is one thing, and GAAP profitability is another. I mean, you remember Salesforce going through this for like 10 years. And so
I tell people, you and I were never profitable for 30 years of our lives, but that was all investment.
Yeah. So we realized that we need to actually have a distributed R&D hub. So we have one in Seattle. Obviously, we have 60% of the people here, but Seattle, Durham, and Bangalore. And the way we seeded Bangalore was, again, very similar to the way we thought about starting a company here, which started at the grassroots. So we picked one of the best Facebook folks who was in India for a while, and he said, he was a leader who spent 15, 18 years in the industry. He said, why don't you start something that is extremely hierarchy-less? We don't want hierarchies because we want to replicate the Silicon Valley culture in Bangalore. And it cannot be bossist. You have corner offices and people being MDs of the traditional kind and so on. So he was kind of the de facto MD of the company, even though he was an engineer at heart and was a designer and architect and so on. And I think the fact that we gave the mantle to him meant a lot because I think he went and created a team that was very egalitarian, that really thought about grassroots. kind of strength and empowering them and things like that. Now we are 400 people in Bangalore in a matter of 3 years, starting from 0 to 400. And we have basically representation of every department, not just engineering, which is about 150 people, about 100 people in support.
We also did some acquisitions in India. And I think
Yeah,
that's
in fact.
one of the things people here are wondering, like, how can they acquire the right companies, talent, teams, and maybe
Yeah, so Saurabh Srinivasan, my colleague, is sitting here in the crowd. I'm sure he's going to show you his scars as well about what it means to acquire an Indian company. But that was also an equally important part of the whole thing, that we found some really sort of promising insurgent entrepreneurs who had spent like 4 or 5 years trying to define what automation, orchestration was all about. And it was highly complementary to what we were doing. And we said, look, at the end of the day, if you're going to bet on hybrid, then this is an important part of the story. Now, if you look at the logistics of hiring a company from India, it's really hard. It's hard because if you're incorporated in India, the incorporation laws are very different than Delaware. So luckily, even though they were a Sequoia company and a global VC-funded company, they had luckily moved their stuff to Singapore. And Singapore makes it a lot easier to. So for those of you thinking about,
structures.
Yeah, structures and things like that, you might want to look at what's happening in India versus what could be done with Singapore.
So while the red carpet is definitely getting rolled out, we still need the red carpet to be incorporated in Singapore.
Well, I mean, and at least this is a snapshot as of 6 months ago, and I'm sure.
No, I mean, these are the practical realities. I think, even in the US, a lot of us are not incorporated in California, right? You're a Delaware corporation,
Yes.
right? So I think we can't be too emotionally attached to where you're incorporated.
Exactly.
How many Delaware companies are there in the world? Everybody, right?
Yep.
So I think it's okay to be incorporated wherever.
And I think in terms of taking a step back from our own operations and acquisition, the one thing that I observe about Indian startups, which I've come to relate to, and it's a very personal thing. It's nothing to do with strategy or things like that. Is obviously the first market they want to go after is the US. Even though there is a domestic market, they want to go after a US market. I mean, it's just like when we started here, if you look at kind of the Silicon Valley customers, they're extremely smart guys who are always skeptical about new stuff. So we didn't find our first customers, even as Nutanix, here in the Bay Area. Our first customers were on the East Coast and the Midwest.
Yeah, I have this Chicago test for my companies. I'm like, you're not a real company till you sell in Chicago.
Yeah, so Midwest and the East Coast and even US Federal was the first place that, which is very surprising for them to be early adopters and innovators. So at some level, India has the same thing, that you can't look for just stuff in Bangalore, you have to figure out something on the outside. So then the CEOs and the founders who actually start these companies, they have a conundrum, which is like, what do I do about hustling? If I have to hustle, then I need to move lock, stock, and barrel to the US because I need to be close to the customers. And then the real fork in the road comes with your spouses and you're moving the family and things like that. And these things are very personal. At some point, the fork in the road is, do I become a CTO or a chief product officer and leave the CEO role to someone else who's going to hustle closer to the customer? What does it mean to get late stage kind of this is your baby, do you want to let go and get a CEO versus you becoming a CEO, but then you have to have sacrifices you need to figure out with respect to moving your family, uprooting them from Bangalore or someplace else and move them to the US. Some really, I would say, personal decisions, but they're probably as strategic because if your spouse and your family is not bought into this, it's more often than not, it's going to be a failure.
That's true, irrespective of whether you're Indian startup or not. So, we are seeing, and I like to I think get Anisha and Dilawar on stage. You guys should just come over and we can continue the conversation. But I think as they're coming up, what's your, I think we're going to see maybe hopefully in the next few years, maybe some real successes out of India. Which segment do you think is the most ripe for progress, right? Where would you, I know you're not an active investor, you still have a real job. Where would you put your next dollar?
Yeah, I think obviously business software is always one of the unique sort of segments to look at, especially as India automates and looks at productivity. Because productivity is a key thing that we're struggling in the US for. The reason why growth here, GDP growth has stalled, is because productivity has stalled. Now, India, the good thing is that there's a huge amount of headroom in productivity, and as
Do you think Indian businesses will ever learn to pay for software?
well, because it's getting harder. I'll tell you why. Because urban areas are becoming really congested. Commute is hard. There is really no answer to infrastructure. I mean, it is what it is. The federal government, central government can't go and say, we'll fix Bangalore's roads, because they can't. It's a state charter. So there are a lot of things that will actually happen which will make a ton of these companies figure out what does it mean to get more productive.
It's a scarcity, right? So I was talking to some people in India, and I was like, the scarcity that I'm concerned about is scarcity of roads and water. And I would love to see a work from home infrastructure company start in India. Like, how can people just work from home? Like, it's not just go to meeting in Skype. Like, can you do the whole thing, including a bundled internet or something? So I think perhaps we'll see some of these innovative things. So let me just turn over to Anish and Dilawar at this point. In the interest of time, I think it'll be best, rather than me continuing to moderate, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your company, and maybe ask one question to Dheeraj about what is at the top of your mind, right? I think that'll give an idea to everybody here, both how you're thinking, also, what Dheeraj would advise to a person in a room, because not all of us can get like an hour with Dheeraj.
Sure.
Does that make sense? Go ahead.
So on Capillary, we are an omni-channel customer engagement and commerce company, focused on Asia as a market. We work with large enterprises, about 200 customers now. A lot of multinationals as customers, some logos up there for you. So we power roughly about 25,000 stores across India, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Indian companies are paying for software. That's a big change. In terms of scale, we're roughly about 450 employees, about 250 enterprise e-commerce sites on the platform, another 25,000 stores. So that's pretty much about us.
What's constraining your growth, right?
Sorry?
What's constraining your growth, and what's on the top of your mind when you think about either growing more in India or in the US?
I think we're addressing the Asia enterprise opportunity, right? So I think SaaS is really happening, or cloud adoption is really happening in Asia as you speak now, which I think was probably 5 years ago in the West. So that big adoption is happening now. And I think the question that I really have for you is, the big problem that we as entrepreneurs face in India is the lack of sales and marketing talent. So you have great engineering talent, services are great, all that stuff is pretty solid. But finally, I think if you're building a great enterprise company, it's about sales and marketing is quite important, right? So, would love to pick your mind on some of that, especially from outside the US context.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a pretty profound question, and I don't think it actually can be answered in just a couple of minutes. But I think the big picture is we started looking at it from the point of view of attitude, which is self-belief, conviction. I mean, the president of my company is a guy from India. In fact, and he has an accent, but he doesn't care. At the end of the day, it's the attitude. And so there's the right brain, which is the attitude, fearlessness, extremely outsider way of thinking about building a sales team. He has 1,200 people report to him today. And 4 years ago, my board asked me, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I said, it's about that attitude. He's an entrepreneur to the core, and we need to actually build this company as if sales is also entrepreneurial, as opposed to just installing somebody who had done it before, because sales is changing dramatically. There's data science, there is getting rid of the cracking the whip mentality and looking at them as people. They're not coin operated, they're all humans first, and then they're something else. All of that is actually happening. Because if you look at the spectrum of selling, I think obviously there is no sales happening. It's like credit cards and selling infrastructure to what inside sellers do with Salesforce, CRM, and things like that. There's a whole spectrum of selling, and obviously the left of it is like an IBM seller going every 3 months or every 3 years to a prospect and saying, look, we have got new technology. And a lot of things are shifting towards more awareness. Sellers, buyers are a whole lot more aware about things. So tech matters, value selling matters, and of course the funnel matters. The funnel, which is what a lot of very good companies have done a great job methodically looking at what does the funnel science mean. How do you start from demand generation, and where do inside sellers pick up? How do inside sellers give way to field reps and things like that? So, I could actually exchange some notes with you on how did we respect the funnel, as opposed to shooting things on the wall and hoping that things will actually stick.
Great. So, Dilawar, you seem to be the magical solution to every SaaS entrepreneur from India's dreams. Have a person who's experience in the US, can be sort of take on either a president or a CEO or CEO role. So we're actually seeing here in play 3 different models, right? The Indian entrepreneur who's moved here, the Indian entrepreneur who's built a company here and went to India, and you who's helping the Indian entrepreneurs. So how's that model worked out, and what convinced you to join Freshdesk at an early stage? I'm kind of surrounded by CRM companies right now, so the next generation is here. I feel like an old guy now.
Sure, happy to share. Starting again, thanks for having me here. Can you hear me well, or I can just project personally? So we, just for everybody's benefit, Freshdesk is a multi-product SaaS company. We primarily have products in the customer engagement space. Freshdesk, the namesake, is for external customer support. Freshservice is an IT service management product that we launched about 2.5 years ago. We just recently launched our own CRM product for inside sales team. You may have seen some buses in San Francisco downtown where we took our big friends head on. And then we also have a mobile in-app support product. And last week we launched Freshchat, a standalone live chat product. So the product velocity has been just incredible, and frankly, in part because of our access to terrific talent in Chennai. Now, I do want to address something that I think you asked of Anish, and the question is, in our case, we haven't just built products out of India. We actually are selling out of India as well. And I say to folks, and I say to my peers in the Valley as well, that having our operations, or a big part of our operations in India, has allowed us to execute on a very ambitious go-to-market strategy. And that is that we are actually democratizing access to software, and we are selling software to teams within companies of any size. Now, if you ask some of peers in the Valley, they will either go after the enterprise or they'll go after the SMB. We actually say, you know what? We are actually addressing everybody, and here's why we can do this. We have a structural advantage as a company, that we can have a high-velocity SMB engine based out of Chennai, where the loaded cost of a sales rep, who is, by the way, not just cost, but also passion-wise, probably on order of magnitude more productive than their peers here in these markets, we can profitably serve the SMB segment. For them, for us, or for that rep, a $200 MRR deal is good enough. It's something that we all celebrate. You can't do that here in this market. That's why very quickly, when Zendesk went public, they frankly abandoned the long tail, because they had to so-called move up market. And you've seen that movie before with Salesforce. You don't see any commitment to SMBs. So as a business, even though today, and I can't share some numbers, but we have a very significant mid-market business, our commitment to SMBs, our commitment to the long tail, our commitment to the main street in the United States as a business segment is core, it's structural, because we can profitably serve that segment. And so that allows, frankly, India allows us to have this very broad vision. So today you see 100,000 plus customers globally. A big chunk of them are companies that I can't name, but we're equally proud of them because they're small companies. But then you also have SolarCity and DHL and 3M and Cisco and Stanford, actually, and others. So I think just having the global model where a big part of the team can properly serve the long tail allows us to have a very ambitious strategy as a company. I'm happy to share notes as well, and of course, learn from you guys as well.
That's great. So it seems like, you've kind of inverted the model in some ways. You're saying not just engineers, there's 1 million plus English educated, well-spoken people who love a job that pays $500 a month, who can prop for $800 or $1,000. For them, it's a dream job, whereas selling on the phone here may be, a misery job. And so therefore you can take that cost advantage and apply it to a global market.
Well, I would say in all fairness, it's challenging everywhere.
Yeah.
There are challenges, by the way, let's be very clear. There are challenges selling out of India. The reality is majority of our business is outside India. Most of our revenue comes from North America, most of our revenue comes from Western Europe, and in all transparency, I think some of our biggest challenges are how do we make sure that our great teams have the customer context? And that's what keeps me up. That's where I try to be the bridge, pun intended, between our great teams and the market, because we are building product for customers, and we can never lose sight of what do they use us for. I mean, as an example, Fresh is a very horizontal product. The use cases that we have are so broad, and it's a constant struggle to make sure that teams understand how it's being used. So what I'm saying is, yes, of course, it's helpful, but I think the reality, there are challenges to make sure people know the context, they understand the business environment, they understand what's going on over here, and especially when you're not just building, but you're also marketing from India, right? And the marketing is local, right? So, and it's very different here than what it would be in parts of Asia.
Thanks. So I think we are going to put this event back on schedule. We could do the Indian thing and have like 500 closing remarks. But I would love for Dheeraj for you to just talk a minute or two about where you think we are as a community of entrepreneurs and Indians and NRIs and whatever are not doing enough. Where can we put our heads together and change the game, right? What helps us take us together to the next level?
Well, I think one on the company strategy, which I think we're not doing enough, is we're not asking the tough question, especially as entrepreneurs sitting in India, of what not to do. I mean, the one thing that I talk about with a lot of the folks that I talk from India is because they think it's an engineering problem. Oh, we can build 3 more products. I'm like, do you understand? It's not about the product. It's about how do you hustle and how do you go to market, actually, which is where the real marketing dollars will start to suffer. And the concept of less is more is not yet in the Bangalore culture. Less is more, as opposed to more is more.
Every time I talk to people, I'm like, yeah, we can build this other thing. Maybe we should have a platform like Salesforce. And I'm like, well, we were at $1 billion in real ARR before we had a platform.
Absolutely.
So
the platform is a rite of passage.
Yes, you have to earn. Yeah, you don't get to build platforms. Even Windows was not a platform. It is an app for a computer, right?
Yeah. And the reason why I bring it up, I mean, we talk about community and everything, is because it's cultural. I think we think like it's easy to develop. But then the question is, what does it mean to develop the business? Not just the product, but the business itself. And then from there, it goes to design, because, knowing what it means to elegantly design the product, the channel, the go-to-market, all that stuff gets clarity, because you know that just because you have a cost advantage or a labor advantage doesn't mean that you'll have marketing dollars advantage and the field sales advantage, because those are extremely expensive when you have customers sitting in Western Europe.
I call it the 100 sales rep problem. So, a bunch of smart people can sit together in a room and say, VDI is the same as storage, is the same as public cloud, is the same as private cloud, same as CRM, and blah, 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 blah. But imagine you just hired your 100 sales rep, whom you're paying maybe 60K, maybe 100K, and he comes from some company, maybe Oracle, EMC, whatever. What are you going to tell him your company does that he can then, on his own, figure everything else out? And I think that's where things break down.
Absolutely.
So you can't scale. So thank you so much. Thank you once again for all the panelists, and look forward to the rest of the sessions.
Thank you.
Thank you.